Every year, I see the same mistake happen again and again. People pick the last lemons from the tree, smile because the season is over, and then simply walk away. They think the hard work is finished, but that one decision quietly steals a big part of next year's harvest. If your lemon tree gave you fewer flowers, smaller fruit, or weak new growth this year, there is a very good chance the real problem started right after the last lemon was picked. I learned this lesson many years ago, and once I changed what I did during those first few weeks after harvest, my trees started rewarding me in a completely different way. I was not buying expensive products or following complicated schedules. I was simply giving the tree exactly what it needed when almost everyone else forgot about it. That is what I want to share with you today. By the end of this video, you will know the simple routine I follow every single year after the last lemon comes off the branch. It does not cost much. Most of it uses things you probably already have at home. It takes very little time, but it helps the tree build strong flower buds, prepare for the colder months, and wake up with much more energy when the new season begins. Most gardeners believe spring is the most important time for lemons, but I honestly think the days after the final harvest matter just as much. This is when the tree decides how strong it will be next year. If you ignore it now, you cannot fully fix that mistake later with fertilizer or extra watering. I know that sounds surprising, because very few people talk about this part of the season. Years ago, an older gardener showed me this forgotten routine, and he smiled when he said that the harvest for next year always begins the moment the last fruit leaves the branch. I never forgot those words because every season they proved to be true. Before we even think about feeding or pruning, there is one simple thing I always do first, and this is exactly where most gardeners unknowingly make their biggest mistake. Dot. The first thing I always do after picking the last lemon is slow myself down and really look at the tree. Most people grab the final fruit and immediately think about the next job in the garden, but this is the moment when your lemon tree quietly tells you what it needs. I stand a few steps back and look at the whole shape before I touch a single branch. Then I move closer and check the leaves, the small twigs, and the ends of the branches where next year's growth will begin. This simple habit costs nothing, but it has saved me from making expensive mistakes many times. A lot of gardeners rush to prune everything that does not look perfect. That is where they lose future flowers without even realizing it. I was shown many years ago that not every branch that looks old is useless. Some of those healthy tips are already preparing the buds that will become next season's flowers. If you cut them away too early or too aggressively, the tree spends its energy replacing wood instead of preparing fruit. That is why I never reach for my pruning shears until I know exactly what I am looking at. I remove only branches that are dead, broken, rubbing against each other, or clearly damaged. Everything else stays for now. Many people are surprised when they hear this because they were taught that a heavy pruning always makes a tree stronger. In my experience, that is simply not true after the final harvest. A stressed tree needs balance, not shock. Another mistake I see all the time is leaving damaged lemons, dried leaves, or fallen fruit under the tree. It may not seem important, but I always clean the ground carefully. Old fruit can attract insects and unwanted diseases, and a clean area allows the soil to breathe and dry more evenly after rain. It only takes a few minutes, yet very few people bother to do it. Once the tree is clean and I know exactly which branches should stay, I can finally help it recover instead of forcing it to waste energy. This quiet inspection has become one of the most valuable habits in my garden because every decision that follows depends on what I discover during these few careful minutes. But there is another step that almost nobody does after this inspection, and I honestly believe it has an even bigger effect on next year's harvest than pruning itself. After the tree is clean and I know which branches should stay, I always turn my attention to the soil, because this is where next year's harvest really begins. Most gardeners look up at the leaves all the time, but the roots decide how much strength the tree will have during winter and how many flowers it can support when spring returns. I learned many years ago that if the soil is ignored after the last harvest, the tree slowly becomes weaker even if it still looks healthy from the outside. That is why I never rush this part. The first thing I do is gently loosen only the top layer of soil with my hand or a small garden fork. I do not dig deeply because lemon roots often grow close to the surface and I never want to damage them. I simply break the hard crust that forms after months of watering and sunshine. This allows rain and fresh air to reach the roots much more easily. It is such a simple step that many people laugh when they see me doing it, but the difference becomes obvious the following season. After that, I add a layer of homemade compost around the tree. I keep it a few inches away from the trunk because I never want moisture sitting directly against the bark. It does not have to be a thick layer. Even a few inches spread evenly around the root zone slowly feeds the soil without forcing the tree into fast, weak growth. An older gardener showed me this years ago and told me that healthy soil feeds a tree much longer than any quick fertilizer ever will. I have followed that advice ever since. If I have a little wood ash from clean, untreated firewood, I sprinkle only a small amount into the compost because lemons appreciate potassium, but I never overdo it. Too much of anything usually creates more problems than it solves. Then I water slowly and deeply instead of giving the tree a quick splash. I want the moisture to move down where the roots actually live. Many gardeners stop watering almost completely after harvest because they think the work is over, while others keep watering too often. I try to find the middle ground because steady moisture helps the roots recover without keeping the soil constantly wet. This quiet routine takes less than half an hour, costs very little, and gives the tree exactly what it needs before winter begins. But there is one forgotten habit that I always do a few days later, and in my experience it is one of the biggest reasons my lemon trees wake up with strong flower buds instead of weak leafy shoots. A few days after I finish feeding the soil, I come back with one more simple job that almost nobody in my neighborhood does anymore. I cover the soil around the tree with a layer of natural mulch. It is not expensive, and it is certainly not a new invention. Gardeners have been doing this for generations because they understood something that many of us forgot. Bare soil loses moisture much faster, and it also changes temperature more quickly when the weather suddenly becomes cold or warm. Those constant changes put unnecessary stress on the roots just when the tree is trying to prepare for the next season. I usually use dry leaves, shredded bark, composted straw, or small pieces of untreated wood. Whatever I use, I always leave a small gap around the trunk because I never want wet material touching the bark for long periods. That little space is important, and most people miss it. The mulch should protect the roots, not cover the trunk. Once everything is in place, I water lightly so the mulch settles naturally without becoming packed down. From that point forward, the soil stays more even in temperature and holds moisture much longer. I spend less time watering and the tree experiences fewer sudden changes that slow its recovery. Many years ago, an older grower told me that a tree resting comfortably through winter wakes up much stronger in spring than one that has been struggling for months below the surface. I have remembered those words every season because they proved themselves again and again. Another thing I always check is the base of the trunk. I remove weeds and grass growing too close because they quietly compete for water and nutrients. It does not look like much from above, but every small weed takes something away from the tree. This is one of those little details that few people pay attention to, even though it costs absolutely nothing to fix. After the area is clean and protected, I simply let the tree rest instead of constantly interfering with it. I do not keep adding fertilizer every week, and I do not keep trimming branches because I have learned that a healthy tree also needs quiet time. Sometimes the best thing we can do is stop trying to improve everything every few days. That patience has rewarded me far more often than constant work ever did. But before winter fully arrives, there is still one careful step that I never skip, because it helps protect the tree through the cold months and makes a remarkable difference when the first warm days of spring finally return. Before the cold weather really settles in, I always spend a little time protecting the tree instead of trying to make it grow. This is another place where many gardeners make a mistake because they continue feeding with strong fertilizers or keep watering as if it were still the middle of summer. The tree is no longer trying to produce lemons. It is preparing to rest and store energy for the months ahead. If you keep pushing it to grow, those fresh young shoots often stay soft and become the first parts damaged by cold weather. I learned that lesson the hard way many years ago after losing a lot of healthy new growth that never had time to mature before winter arrived. Since then, I have changed my routine completely. I reduce watering little by little instead of stopping all at once. I only water when the soil actually begins to dry because I want the roots to stay healthy without sitting in constantly wet ground. This simple balance makes a much bigger difference than most people expect. If a cold night is coming, especially when temperatures are close to freezing, I prepare the tree before sunset instead of waiting until the last minute. If my lemon tree is growing in a container, I move it into a sheltered place where it is protected from cold wind. If it is planted in the ground, I use a breathable frost cloth to cover the canopy during the coldest nights. I never wrap the tree with plastic because moisture can become trapped underneath and create even bigger problems. That is one of those old mistakes that many people still repeat every year. I also check the branches one more time and remove anything that is broken since the last inspection. I do not perform heavy pruning because the tree does not need another shock before winter. It only needs to stay clean and healthy. One habit that an older gardener showed me years ago is to whitewash the lower part of the trunk with a simple tree-safe mixture before winter if strong winter sun is common in your area. It helps reduce sudden temperature changes between cold nights and bright sunny days that can sometimes damage the bark. It is an old method that costs very little but has stayed with me because it works. Once all of these small jobs are finished, I stop worrying. I let nature do its part while I simply check the tree from time to time. Then something interesting begins to happen long before most people notice it. Because while the garden appears quiet, the lemon tree is already preparing the flower buds that will decide next season's harvest. And there is one final habit that helps those buds become stronger than ever before. Spring arrives. As winter slowly comes to an end, I never rush outside with fertilizer or pruning shears because I have learned that patience usually brings better results than excitement. I simply watch the tree for the first signs that it is waking up again. The buds begin to swell a little, the leaves look fresher, and tiny new shoots start to appear. This is the moment when many gardeners make another mistake. They feed the tree with too much fertilizer because they want fast growth. I understand why they do it, because I used to think the same way. But a lemon tree that suddenly receives too much nitrogen often produces a lot of soft green leaves instead of putting its strength into flowers and fruit. I prefer a slower and steadier approach. I give the tree a balanced citrus fertilizer at the recommended rate or a light feeding with well-aged compost if that is what I have available. I would rather feed the tree a little than too much because it is always easier to add more later than to correct overfeeding. At the same time, I begin watering more regularly as temperatures rise, but I still let the top layer of soil dry slightly between waterings. Constantly wet soil weakens the roots, while steady moisture encourages healthy growth without unnecessary stress. Another habit I never skip is checking every branch for small signs of damage from winter. If I find a dead tip or a weak twig, I remove only that small section with clean, sharp pruners. I never cut healthy wood just because I feel like doing something. Every healthy branch has the potential to carry flowers, and every flower can become a lemon. Many years ago, an experienced grower told me that every unnecessary cut is a lemon you may never harvest. Those words stayed with me, and they changed the way I look at pruning forever. Then the part I enjoy most finally arrives. The first flower buds begin to open, and the tree fills the air with that wonderful fresh scent that every citrus grower knows so well. At that moment, I already know that the work I did months earlier is paying off. The healthy buds were not created overnight. They were prepared little by little through every simple step after the last harvest. Most people only notice the flowers in spring, but I know they really began forming back when the tree looked quiet and almost forgotten. There is only one final lesson I want to share because it completely changed the way I think about growing lemons, and it is probably the simplest lesson of all. If there is one thing I hope you remember after watching this video, it is that next year's lemon harvest does not begin in spring. It begins the moment you pick the last fruit from the tree. That is when the tree depends on you the most, even though it may not look like it needs anything. Over the years, I stopped chasing expensive products and complicated methods because I discovered that simple habits repeated every season bring the biggest rewards. I clean the area around the tree. I avoid heavy pruning. I feed the soil instead of forcing fast growth. I protect the roots with natural mulch. I prepare the tree for winter instead of pushing it to keep growing. Then I wait patiently and let nature do the rest. None of these steps are difficult, and none of them require a large budget. That is one of the reasons I still enjoy growing lemons after so many years. The best results often come from the oldest and simplest methods. Every season, when I see those first flower buds opening, I remember that they were not created by luck. They were created by small decisions made months earlier when most people had already forgotten about their trees. That is why I never rush through the days after the final harvest. They are some of the most valuable days of the entire year. If your lemon tree has disappointed you before, I truly believe you can change that starting today. You do not need to replace your tree, and you do not need to spend a fortune on special products. Give it the right care at the right time and allow it to build its strength naturally. Then watch how differently it responds when the new season begins. I hope these simple steps help you enjoy healthier trees, stronger flowering, and baskets filled with larger lemons for many years to come. If you decide to follow this routine, I would love to hear how your tree responds next season, because every garden teaches us something new. And there is one more forgotten habit that I still use every year to keep my citrus trees productive, even as they grow older. Almost nobody talks about it anymore, but once you see what it does, you may never care for your lemon tree the same way again.